All right, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today's class. This is the first Parsha in my life class in this year, I think. Maybe we did one. Did we do one? Could be. But it's since we started Bereshis. That's what I mean by this year. 5786. This is the first round of Torah we're learning, Bereshis and Noach. And so today's class, I'm going to focus not that much on the Torah portion, but I'd like to catch everyone up a little bit on some of the thoughts on the mind-blowing things that are happening in the world and that happened, the current events that took place over Sukkot, over the holiday of Sukkos, which we just completed, and primarily the grand, incredible day of Hoshana Rabbah, which was the last day of Sukkot before the 8th day, the 7th day of Sukkot. And the events that happened on that day, everybody is familiar with the release of the hostages, all the remaining living hostages that came home. Baruch Hashem, Hodul Hashem Kitov. I'd like to now focus a little bit on that in terms of the Messianic process and what is happening as I see it. Again, this is all guesswork. This all might be correct. Let's see how this, So I'm seeing very, very great things in these events, and some of them might shock you. Let's see where this is all going. Let's, of course, begin with the Parsha, because we can't ignore the Parsha. The unique thing about Parshas Noach is that in Parshas Noach, the world moved into a completely different era. Now, there was the era, there's like two eras. There's the era before the Mabul, the era, the period before the flood, and then there's the period after the flood. And the world fundamentally changed after the flood on many, many levels. First of all, something the Rebbe always mentions is that the world became far more stable after the flood because God promised that he would never shake up the world again. And he would never stop the order of the galaxies. During the flood, it says that all the mazalos, all the constellations ceased to operate. So there was kind of a cessation of everything. Everything came to a screeching halt. God promised that from that day and onward, he would keep the system of creation ongoing and he would never destroy the world again. So the world received a great stability. On the deeper level, we know that after the flood and Noah came out and he rebuilt the world was already in a purified state because the flood was a form of a mikveh, a form of a purification. And the world was already purified, and the world experienced a great reset, and the reset was what prepared the world for the next stage would be the Jewish people, the giving of the Torah. So we know that the giving of the Torah opened up a whole new reality in creation. It moved the world into the third stage. So you might want to divide the world into three stages. I mean, you could divide it into more, but first you have the pre-flood, a mankind in its full denigration, its full free fall of the human race. Then the world begins to repair itself. God created the world with this mechanism of self-repair it can recreate itself, and that was Noah's task. And that's why the sages tell us that when Noah came out of the teva, when he came out of the ark, when Noah came out, he saw a new world. And then again, and this was like a prep, a purer world, a more humbler world. The human beings after the flood were intrinsically more humble and not as arrogant like the people, and not as spoiled and not as rotten, if you might say, the people before the flood. There was a little more fear of God in humanity. And this all set the stage for the giving of the Torah. And of course, then the further stages are the building of the temple, which brought the Shechinah down into the world. And then it came, of course, the era of exile, in which we go into a state of concealment, but at the same time, we're going into a state of deep cleansing, a much deeper cleansing, because the Jewish people are being scattered amongst the nations. And the purpose of that is in order to purify all of humanity, not just to create a heavenly abode in Jerusalem, but to impact the entire world. And that's when the Shechinah goes to exile with the Jewish people. And finally, you come to the redemption. It comes to the time of the Moshiach and the redemption. And afterwards comes the time of Techiyas HaMeisim, of the resurrection. And then the world enters into Shabbat. Shabbos, that's in the year 6000. So these are various stages, and I'm sure you can break them up in different ways, but this is kind of a general scope of the world moving from stage to stage. Now, we know that every year is a different energy, and every year is progress, and every day is progress, and every second is progress. That's true. But even within progress, there are certain milestones which are noticeable and which we have to recognize. Notice when everything changes. It's like when you're driving on the freeway and you're going cross country. It's like you're going miles and miles and miles. You're going, and within that, you're going from, and the scenery is changing, and you're going from county to county. But there's a certain change that happens when you cross a border and you moved into, you went from Texas to New Mexico. You've crossed that border. It's a different energy. It's already a different place. In the same way, especially if you're crossing border, which is a different country. If you're traveling in Europe, you see that a lot because you're always, every couple of miles a different country. I remember when I was in Europe, it felt very, very, very. It's different than the United States. You could go and go and go. You're still always in the United States, but here you're constantly, crossing borders and so on and so forth. The same is over here. There are certain moments in time when we're crossing into a different era. So I've already discussed it in earlier classes that this year, it seems like we're crossing, not seems like, from the Zohar, that we are actually entering into a different era. Whether we're entering it literally into the era of the resurrection this year, whether it's going to be fully immersed into that era in the time of, in 4 years from now, in 1930. I'm not in 1930, I mean in 2030. Again, is a question in the Zohar, as we discussed in last class, where we gave the two opinions of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yitzchak, whether the resurrection begins for the tzaddikim, for the early resurrection, 210 years, the last 210 years before the year 6000, or it starts 214 years. If it's 214, we just entered this last month into that zone, which means resurrection is not just a miracle. Resurrection is a complete shift. The era of resurrection is a complete massive shift in the consciousness of the world, and of the world opening up to new potential that is incredible. The godly revelation. It's almost like the very underpinnings of existence, the very flow of energy in the world exponentially grows in the time of resurrection. So this is awesome times to have arrived. If by Rosh Hashanah by night, when you picked up your cup by Kiddush and you said, Shehechiyanu v'kimanu v'giyanu lazman hazeh, God, you have kept me alive, Shehechiyanu v'kimanu, and you've sustained me, v'giyanu, and you have me arrived lazman hazeh, to these days. You do that every Rosh Hashanah, every holiday, but in Rosh Hashanah especially, you made it to be alive another year. What a great thing is to have entered into the period of 5786. It's a game changer. It's a whole different reality. Now, again, I'll reference you to that class. Look it up on the YouTube, something like Resurrection in 5786. But based on that, I'm connected. So that's what the relationship to Noach is. Because Noach also was crossed over. That year of the flood was the crossing over from the previous world to the new world. And we might kind of say that the last 2 years, since October 7th, was this massive flood which marked the crossover from the pre-resurrection era to the post-resurrection era. And a major, major milestone of all of this, a major passageway, a major a transition happened this Sukkos and on the last day of Sukkot, which was Hoshana Rabbah, which was the day, what was it? It was last week, Monday, exactly a week ago on Monday, and when all the remaining hostages were released. Now, I think there are two very, very dynamic events that happened on that day that are extraordinary, and that's what I'd like to speak about tonight. One of them was the hostages coming out. That's huge. And I'd like to pay attention to the fact that there were 2 minyanim. That means that the amount of Jews that came out live, living hostages, were 2 sets of 10. They were released as 7 and 13, which probably also has tremendous significance, but the sum total was 20. Now, that's a very significant number because that means there were 2 minyanim. A minyan is a quorum. Now, in order to have a minyan, you need to have 10 adult males together. That creates a minyan. And why is a minyan so powerful? Because the Shechinah dwells where there are 10 Jews. So let me make a suggestion. And here's my suggestion. That a pivotal component of the geula, of the redemption process, is that the Shechinah goes out of exile. We know that along with the Jewish people, when the Jewish people go to exile, Shechinah imahem, the Shechinah goes along with us. Galu la'edom Shechinah imam. The Gemara says that wherever the Jewish people are in exile, the Shechinah. What's the Shechinah? Shechinah is the divine manifestation and dwelling in creation. There is godly light and divine energy above and beyond creation. That's not called Shechinah. That's higher than. That's called Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Shechinah is the immanence of God within the world. And so the Shechinah is intrinsically attached to the Jewish people, in as much as the Jewish people are meant to be the conveyors of the divine to the creation. They're meant to be the main channels of God to the world. Through the souls of Israel, divine consciousness is disseminated into the world through Israel and through the Torah. That's why in the first word of Torah, it says Bereshis, and the sages say Beis Reishis, two things that are called first. The two things that are called first are the Israel and the Torah, because through Israel, because God did not create the world for him to remain obscured and concealed, but God created the world for him to be revealed, that the world should become conscious, very conscious of God, and God should have a home in this world. And that happens through the Jewish people doing the mitzvot and studying Torah. That's why for the sake of the Torah and for the sake of Israel, God created the world. That's how we reveal the Shechinah in the world. So therefore, wherever the Jewish people go, wherever Israel travels, God goes along with us. Shechinah comes along with us. And when we're in exile, the Shechinah comes along. Now, into exile. Now, when will the Shechinah go out? When Israel comes out of exile. Now, did we go out of exile already? Now, one of the, obviously, there are still tragic events that are happening. Just last night, something very horrific took place in which there was an accident in New York. And very sadly, Hashem should help comfort the families. I don't even know how, what, where, and when, but it's like horrible. It was the accident and 4 young boys died. It was like yeshiva boys, just terrible. And then you hear stories like this, you realize, okay, you know what? With all the talk that Moshiach is already here, but come on, let's have it like in a way where there's no more death in the world, where it's fully manifest. So obviously there is still I'm still praying and we're still crying out for the complete geula. But however, at the same time, we do have to notice major things that happen and recognize them and call them out for what they are, that these are very, very great events. So it says the Shechinah will not really leave the exile until the very last Jew comes out of exile. God says, I will take every single one by the hand and take them out. However, within that, there is now one of the most striking and one of the most strongest expressions or manifestations of the Jewish people being in exile that happened, that takes place at the end of the exile, like right at the conclusion of the Galut, was October 7th. Like it was like almost like the grand final act of suffering, collective suffering for Israel. There's no question. There's not going to be anything after this. God forbid, on such a scale. It's not happening. It's not happening. We're over the dark days. I quoted to you from the Zohar in our last class that the Zohar speaks about a 40-year period that goes in between the gathering, that from the time when the beginning of the gathering of the exiles, in which we identified in the last class, starting either in 1986 or in 1990, because in 1986 was when kind of it started to brew, Gorbachev was put into power in late 1985. I mean, the beginning of 1985, but in terms of the Hebrew calendar, late 5785, so close to 5786, which is where the 40-year period begins before this year, which is 5746, which is 40 years prior, Tafshem Mem Vav, which is 40 years prior to Tavshin Pei Vav, so that's when Gorbachev went into power and he dismantled the Soviet Union, which brought about the collapse of the Iron Curtain, which allowed the Jewish people to go up to Israel, which is the beginning of Kibbutz Galias, as I mentioned in the last class, according to the Rebbe. So that's what I rely on. And the Zohar is saying 40 years later is going to be the Techiyas HaMeisim. So if we begin from 1986, 40 years. So those are 40. Or we could start in 1990 when the actual exodus happened of Russian Jewry to Israel and the Grand Aliyah. And then again is culminating in 4 years from now, in 2030, in 5790. Okay, these are the two periods. I told you there's a 4-year discrepancy, not 4 year, there's a 4-year difference. So we're in that zone of those 4 years. Awesome time. So the Zohar says that in between in this 40-year period will be a time when you won't want to be alive. Thank God. Thank God we're over those 40 years. We're done with it. And it seems like the grand finale of it was October 7th. And at that time, we saw one of the things that was striking was that Jews were taken into captivity. Now, when do you remember that ever happening? Jews being taken in captivity. These are stuff that happened way in the pirates would do that on the ships, taking people into captivity. You had massacres, you had killings. The Nazis kind of took the Jews to concentration camps, in a sense, took them to captivity, I would say. But it felt different in the sense that they were dragging them into their tunnels, dragging them which felt this idea of going into an exile, going into a deep dungeon. And as I discussed in earlier classes, back then when October 7th happened, why would this happen right now? Was because we know that when the forces of evil and darkness know that they're about to expire, they need to hold on for dear life. And what gives them life? Sparks of holiness. When we've excavated and extracted every spark of holiness from the klipa is gasping for air. It needs oxygen to stay alive. So in their haste, in their what's it called again, desperation, they run inside to Israel. They run into the bordering little villages, that the kibbutzim, those that are right next to the border, and they grab living Jews and even dead Jews and take them and drag them into Gaza, and they use them as human shields physically, but spiritually they're also using them because they're taking parts of the Shechinah and they're taking it into exile. So October 7th was a sense of another level of Galut HaShechinah, of the Shechinah being dragged into exile. The mother went along with her children. God himself was dragged into Gaza on October 7th. But it's not for long, because it's a last attempt. It's a last attempt to hold on. But that exile is similar to the Egyptians grabbing Yosef. See, the spiritual forces that forced the Egypt, when Yosef comes to Egypt, that's the same idea. You see, when a nation subconsciously feels that a spiritual force, a magnet, a powerful spiritual magnet is coming to pick up their sparks and to empty them out, they get very nervous. Why do you think that Joseph, who was the one who was going to lead Israel into the exile of Egypt for the same purpose of elevating all the sparks that were buried in Egypt? So when those sparks of holiness, when Egypt senses that the Jewish people are coming, and when Egypt senses that the Jewish people are coming and they're about to do a vacuum cleaning and to grab and to take and to extract all the sparks of holiness and excavate and leave Egypt without any power. So what do? They try to do the opposite. They try to they try to latch on to that power and drag it into its dungeon. And that's why they grabbed Yosef and they took Yosef as prisoner and put him into a pit. Of course, it came about through a whole story where he was accused of rape, which wasn't true, that he wanted to rape his mother. There's a whole story. But it was the spiritual forces, the klipot of Egypt, took Yosef and dragged him into the dungeon, similar to the Gazans grabbing Jewish hostages and taking them into their dungeons. How long was Yosef in prison? 12 years. But he was really only decreed to be there for 10 years. But then Yosef got another 2 years. When the Torah describes that Yosef was going to become out of prison, it says, Vayehi miketz. It was at the conclusion, Shenasayim Yamim, of 2 years. And then Yosef left. Paro had a dream, and Yosef is then freed from the dungeon and comes out. And he goes out to become the ruler of Egypt. And in that case, he opens up the road for his brothers and his family to come down to Egypt. The Egyptians do the same thing to the Jewish people like they did to Yosef. They grab Israel and enslave them just like they tried to enslave Joseph. But just like Joseph was the forebearer and the trailblazer and managed to come out of Egypt and then come out of that dungeon and then take control over all of Egypt, so too happens to the Jewish people, that they rise from the dungeon. They rise from the dark slavery and they become the masters over Egypt. And then they manage to take out all the sparks of holiness that they dare with the physical wealth, and then take all of that and build a temple with that for God, and then eventually go to the land of Israel, to the promised land, go on to take the Torah. And the power the Jewish people had, that is from Joseph doing it first. When did Joseph come out? Exactly 2 years. The verse says, Vehi miketz shenasayim yamim, at the end of 2 years. So everything, history repeats itself. These hostages were similar to Yosef, because as the last vestige, the last monsters, listen to this is important to understand, the last monsters of exile that are still surviving, that feel that the last bits of energy are going to be taken out of them, they fight tooth and nail. So they ran in on the day of Joseph, they did it. Actually, Shmini Atzeret is connected to Joseph in many ways. It says that sages say that the Zohar, according to the Zohar, Shmini Atzeret is the energy of Yosef. That's why the Zohar says, just like Yosef was alone with his brothers, and he said, take everybody out. I want to be alone with my brothers when I reveal myself to them. So too God says to the nations, everybody leave. It's only me and Israel alone. Bizvade Yosef. So Shmini Atz, it says that the three holidays, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. Pesach corresponds to Avram, Shavuot corresponds to Yitzchak, and Sukkos personifies and represents Yaakov, and Shmini Atzeret is Yosef. It's a lot to speak about that. So just like Yosef was dragged into a dungeon, they came on the day of Yosef and grabbed all these hostages and took them to Egypt. Exactly 2 years later, like by Yosef, to the day on the Hebrew calendar, completing the full 2 years, Hoshana Rabbah, which is the day before Shmini Atzeret, they were forced to release their last hostages. And 2 minyans of Jews left. 2 minyans. Now, by the way, I want to share something incredible. The Midrash tells us, Kol ma she'ira leYosef ira leTzion. Whatever happens to Joseph happens to Zion, which means to the Jewish people. To Zion represents the city of Zion, which is Jerusalem. It also represents the Jewish people. So the Midrash does a comparison, and it goes through everything that happens to Yosef, and the brothers hated Joseph, so too the nations of the world will hate the Jewish people. Just like the Zohar makes a comparison on everything that happens. Entire Jewish history is a kind of a carbon copy of the story of Joseph. So when you see it, at the last moments before, when Moshiach is about to come, and you see that the in Gaza, which are the Amalekites, grab Joseph, grab the Jewish people, take them in, and then they're forced to release them again on Hoshana Rabbah. This, to me, represents just like Joseph is going out to become king, Israel is going out, but Israel is now rising. Everybody has to understand something. Israel is now rising. The Jewish people are now rising. And if I dare say, I will say something very sharp, very strong, not sharp, but strong. And that is that the Shechinah, the left exile, this Hoshana Rabbah, with the exit of these last hostage. First of all, the hostages are coming out, and they're coming out like lions. They're not coming out like defeated people. They're not coming out like people that are crushed and of course they need therapy, and I'm sure they need healing, but they're coming out with such strength after what these people endured, after what they've been through. But they're coming out with a message of hope. They're coming out with a message of joy. Now I'll also show you something amazing. It says there are 4 people that need to bring a korban todah. A korban todah is a thank you offering. Today's days, we don't have a korban todah. Instead of a korban todah, which is a thanksgiving offering, we say mizmar letodah. Mizmar letodah, which is, we say King David made chapter 100 in Psalms as a song for a thanksgiving. Aril Hashem kol, let the whole world shout out to God. Now, one of the people that have to give thanks to God is a captive who came out of captivity. So when Moshiach will come, we will all say Mizmar L'Soda. And that will be our song. So someone brought to my attention something really minyan, very special. I'm giving a shout out to Michael Lewis, who was here on Simchas Torah. The hostages were in captivity exactly because we were counting the days. The Jewish people have such love for each other that we were actually I saw on so many websites, every day they were just counting the days of how long these hostages are in captivity. They weren't just saying 2 years. They were saying days. They were in captivity exactly 738 days. Now, 738 is the exact numeric value of the word Mizmar Letodah. Actually, Mizmar Letodah is 739, which means on 738 days they were in captivity, and then as they come out, Mizmar Letodah, this is the things. But it's not just them coming out. They're coming out with the Shechinah. Now, when they're coming out with the Shechinah, where is it seen that the Shechinah is exiting from exile? The fact that it was by divine providence 2 minyanim, exactly 20. We know wherever there is 10 people, the Shechinah dwells. So when 10 Jews go out of exile, especially in this case, they were 10 male Jews, which is perfect for a minyan. It would have been Shechinah like that also, but literally, halachically, it counts as a minyan. 2 times 10 came out, the Shechinah came out. Why twice? Why twice? It's because in Shechinah, there is 2 levels. The Shechinah Tata, the lower Shechinah, and the Shechinah Ila'ah, the higher Shechinah. One of them is Rachel, and the other one is Leah, the 2 wives of Yaakov. Rachel is the lower Shechinah, the Shechinah that is more imminent, more in the trenches. That's why Rachel is the one who cries for her children, Kol Barama Nishma. Leah, however, is also called Shechinah, but the higher level of Shechinah. They correspond to the 2 hays of God's name. Now, the 2 hays of God's name, you can read it 2 ways. Is Yud Kei Vav Kei. So we know the latter hay is the lower Shechinah, called Malchut, kingship. That's Rachel. The higher hay, Yud Kei, is Leah, is the first hay of Hashem's name. And that's the higher hay. We know when we do tshuva, there's 2 levels of tshuva, the lower tshuva and the higher tshuva. Tshuva tata, the lower teshuva, and tshuva ilah, because it's returning these 2 hays, taking the Shechinah out of exile on both levels. And what occurred to me right now, as I am speaking right now, this occurred to me right now, this is a bomb, that in every hay, there is another hay. Because how do you spell hay? Hay, hay. So really, it's 10, it's 2 times 10, it's 20, it's the 4 hays. You realize what's going on here? The 4 hays, it's 20 boys coming out of the dungeons of Gaza. Now, when are they coming out? On Hoshana Rabbah, the last day of Sukkot, the day of King David. We know that every day of Sukkot, the 7 days correspond to one of the correspond to one of the Ushpizim. We have every day one of the 7 powerful divine attributes and 7 tzaddikim, 7 holy souls that embody these attributes. And the first day we invite Abraham to our sukkah, and the second day we invite Isaac to our sukkah. So the last day is King David. Now we know David HaMelech, he is Malchut, he is the Shechinah, he's the personification of Shechinah. So this is the Shechinah's day, the last day. And that's the reason why we make Hoshana Rabbah. Hoshana means saving. Hoshana means a salvation, a savior, to bring forth. And we know that in Hoshana Rabbah, it's called Hoshana Rabbah, the great saving. What's the saving of who? The savior of who? Saving who? Saving Israel from exile and saving the Shechinah from exile. When I was a little boy, I used to daven in a special shul with a very big tzaddik called the Shechinah Rebbe. Rabbi Yehuda Horowitz of Shechinah. Passed away in 1982. No, in Tafshem Membeis, it was in the end of 1981 still. Passed away, as soon as going to be his yard site on Tes Cheshvan. I was 9 years old when he passed away. I would sit by, I grew up literally by him. He held me by my brit, he held me, and he was my sandik. He cut my hair when I was 3 years old. I would stand watching him by his holy, what we call a holy tish, when he would eat his Shabbos meals public together with the people and sing. If you ever wanted to see a person who you can watch on his face that he's melting into God's, with longing for Hashem, it was incredible. He was a huge Kabbalist, huge tzaddik. Every Hoshana Rabbah, he would cry, weep, and he would cry and call out Ad Masai. Besides the Lubavitcher Rebbe, I don't remember hearing from another tzaddik like the weeping cry of Ad Masai, until when? And on Hoshana Rabbah, every year, and I took out his book, I have a sefer in my house. Every year when he would say Torah on Hoshana Rabbah, the Torah was that on Hoshana Rabbah, the Shechinah goes out of exile. This is the day. And he said, in order to see where the Shechinah comes out of exile, how do you notice it on Hoshana Rabbah? So we know that on the lulav, the 4 species of vegetation that we take on Sukkot, that we all have a mitzvah to take, on Hoshana Rabbah is the last day that we take it. We do various different types of shaking we say a blessing and we shake it to the 6 directions. In addition to that, when we say Hallel, we do what's called Nanuyim. Nanuyim is you shake it. Now, by the great Hasidic masters, not in Chabad. Chabad, everything is done in a way of very much like, a lot of times very simple. Meaning there's a lot of kavanot, but by the Rebbes, you didn't see that, not always that much expression on the outside. But by many of the Polish great tzaddikim, they would do nanuyim. They would spend hours doing it, shake and shake, and they would sing songs, and they would be like, it was like a whole avodah. By him, it was a very big avodah, the nanuyim. Each time they shook, it was different songs. I knew the song, each one we all knew every year was the same, but each nanuyim had its own niggin. And Hoshana Rabbah was like, it was incredible. It was just apps on Hoshana Rabbah. You could see on him that he was in a different place. So we know that when on the lulav, there are certain. You're supposed to bind the 4 species together, not the esrog. Esrog remains separate. You're supposed to hold it together. But the other 3 species, which is the myrtle branch, the willows, and the palm branch, you tie them together. Now, in addition to tying them together, you also put 2 rings made out of one of the leaves of the palm. You make 2 rings and you put them on the lulav itself. Simply, it's to hold the branches of the lulav of the palm together. You put 2 of them on the lulav. Now, it says, there's a minhag that says like this, and it says in the Hayom Yom that day, that's Hayom Yom's instructions, that before we say Hallel, you remove those 2 rings. And it doesn't give the explanation why you remove those rings on Hoshana Rabbah. So the Rebbe, Rabbi Yehuda Horowitz of Shechinah, where I grew up, would always say, the reason we remove the rings is because the lulav represents the Shechinah. Because the word lulav means to him a heart. She is the feminine side of God, and her heart is to her husband. Lo leiv, she has only one heart to her husband. All she wants is to reunite with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with the vast infinity of God. If we translate Shechinah as the collective soul of Israel, what's in the heart of the Jewish people? Lo, to him is our heart. Our heart is only to God. Ein lahem, the Midrash says, Ein lahem leiv ela leiv echad, one heart, lavim shabashamayim, to the Father in heaven. So the lulav represents the Shechinah. When the reason we have these rings on the lulav is because it's indicative of the Shechinah being in exile. Since Hoshana Rabbah, the Shechinah will come out of exile, we take off the rings. But he doesn't explain why it's 2 rings. But this year I figured it out. Because it's 2 levels of Shechinah that go out. 2 times 10 boys came out on Hoshana Rabbah. And the Shechinah came out of exile. Now you want to get goosebumps? So it occurred to me on Hoshana Rabbah, this verse. Because when I saw that the hostages were there 738 days, I said, 738, what is that? So we said earlier, Mizma Latoda, but this someone else told me. But before that, on Hoshana Rabbah, I said to myself, hey, it's got to be something here. Why were they 738 in the dungeon and they came out exactly? 738 is the word tishlach. Tishlach means to send. Taf shin, taf is 400, shin is 300, that's 700. Lamed ches is tishlach. And I was playing with the word tishlach, and then I almost fainted. What's the verse? Shalach tishalach esa'im, send away the mother bird, the esabanim tikachlach, and the children take to yourself. Let that sink in. Shalach tishalach esa'im, send away the mother. Who's the mother? The Shechinah is called the mother of all souls. Ema Tata, she's the lower mother. She's the mother. The whole Galut Shechinah is how do we know that the Shechinah is in exile? Because the verse says, it's a verse, I don't remember where it is, maybe in Jeremiah. It says, Ubipish achem, and through your sins, Shilcha imchem, your mother was cast into exile. Your mother was sent away. From there we learn out that because of our sins, our mother soul, which means the divine presence, also comes to exile. So the verse is saying, Tishalach, at the end of 738 days of captivity, you will release Tishalach. Let's get it. How do we know the Shechinah went to exile? Because it says, Ubi pishachem, in your sins, Shulcha imchem, your mother was banished. Shulcha means she was sent. So how is she going to be released? She's going to be sent back. The same word. Shulcha means she is sent. So how do we unsend her? We send her back the other way. Shalach tishalach esa'im. Send away the mother bird. That's talking about the mitzvah. The simple verse is in Deuteronomy. It says that what? That when you encounter a nest of thing and you want to take the little birds, you're not allowed to take the little birds until you send away the mother. Shoo away the mother and then take the birds. That's the simple. But we know that in this verse, by the way, the Zohar says is hidden the secrets of Moshiach. This is a huge Kan Sipor. Moshiach's nest is called Kan Sipor. This is if there's ever a pasuk that's Moshiach, it's this verse. So Shalach to Shalach Hasa'im. Send away the mother bird. How do you know when the mother bird is going out? At the end of 738 days of the deepest, darkest captivity for the Shechinah. That's why the Jewish people felt this captivity more than we felt any captivity ever. There never was a captivity in which all of Israel's hearts were crying every day. Never when there was so much Tehillim said by every type of Jew. Secular, religious, this yarmulke, this keep. Everybody was saying Tehillim. Everybody was so tuned into these hostages because the Shechinah was with them more than ever before. Shalach to Shalach, send off Esa'im, the mother. And how will you know? Vesabanim tikachlach, the children you will take back home. Tikachlach, take it back to yourself. These boys have now rejoined us. The removal of those 2 rings, the lower Shechinah, the higher Shechinah, all happened on this Hoshana Rabbah. In the year of resurrection. In the year when the time of exile is supposed to end. All right. So that's one big event that happened this Hoshana Rabbah. And let me share the second event. That corresponded at the same time, and the 2 will link together. And that is as follows. I already shared with you in the classes in the past that there is supposed to be a massive, massive dark period and a dark war right before Moshiach comes, which is called the War of Gog and Magog, which represents a very, very, very violent time with a lot of bloodshed and a lot of carnage that the world has never seen. And the idea of that war is that there is a effort by the nations of the world to get in the way and stop the redemption. That's kind of the idea. And then God himself comes out and he fights against the nations and he completely obliterates them. That's the story. Sadly, in this course of this war, there's a lot of suffering to the entire world and a lot of suffering to Israel. This war is depicted in various places in the Navi, primarily in Zechariah and Zechariah, and also in Ezekiel and Yecheskel. Two places where it's primary. It's hinted to in many other places, even in the Chumash itself, in various places, but it's primarily depicted in the prophets. Now, but it's very vague, and it's not clear exactly what we're in, who is who, and the wars will be led by this fellow called Gog, and there's this nation called the Magog, and this is kind of what has kind of kept the minds of biblical, explorers and stuff, occupied exactly who is going to represent these nations that are going to come against Israel in war at the end of days. Now, the war of Gog and Magog, interestingly, is very much connected to the holiday of Sukkot. I shared with you a statement in the Torah. Torah is one of the fundamental books of Jewish law, going back to written in the 12th, 13th century by Rabbi Yaakov Baal HaTurim, and he maybe the 14th century. Any case, and in his Sefer HaTorah, he brings from Rabbi Goyen. Rabbi Goyen, he says Kabbalah b'Yodeinu. We have a Kabbalah, we have a tradition that the war of Gog and Magog is going to take place in Sukkos. And how do we know that? Because we see on Sukkot, we had two reading of Haftorah, two portion of prophets that we read. One on the first day of Sukkot. You can look up Haftorah for the first day of Sukkot. That's from Zechariah. And then on the Shabbos Chalamod, which is from Ezekiel. These are two, we read actually these two depictions of the war of Gog and Magog. Both of them we do on Sukkot. And on Passover, when Shabbos comes out, Chalamod, when Chalamod means the intermediate days between the two holidays, the first days and the latter days, when it falls out on Shabbat on Saturday, we read the passage about resurrection. So Rabbi Goyen says, this is again, Rabbi Goyen lived, I think, in the 9th century or the 8th century, way back. And he says he has a Kabbalah, he has a tradition going back, must have been all the way to the early days of the stages, that the war of Gog and Magog will be a Sukkos event, and the war of and the resurrection will be a Passover event, or in the month of Nisan. That's why we read this then and this then. So if this year is the year of the resurrection, I'm putting a lot of hopes for Passover and for the month of Nisan. I don't want to wait till then, and we shouldn't have to wait till then, but mark your calendars. But if that's the case, then again, I'm not I don't know. I'm just saying, based on what I am, my intuitions, and what I'm coming across in the books, and the way the whole puzzle seems to be coming together. This is the way it's coming. And I'm going to try to share with you some of the interesting sources. And the war of Gog and Magog. Now, one of the things I've mentioned in earlier classes is that regarding the war of Gog and Magog, even Rambam says that no one knows how it's going to be until it's going to happen. And the reason for that is not because no one had the information, was just because it has so many variables. It could go down in a million different ways. In other words, there is a basic structure that has to happen, but it could go down in many different ways. And to make it simple to you for the listenership, I will say like this. The war of Gog and Magog can be from a 1 to 100. 100 being the most severe and a 1 being the most lightest. And depending on how long the exile will be, depending on how much suffering we still need to complete the purification that is needed to happen during exile, that will determine the severity of the war of Gog and Magog. Now, one of the options to make the war of Gog and Magog much, much easier on the Jewish people was to take the snowball, or to take this big rock, massive rock, and to chip it into small pieces. So it doesn't come in one shot, it comes in various different smaller pieces, so it's more tolerable. So I think two things happen. Number one, the duration of the exile and the horrors Israel has been through. And you might even argue that certain chunks of the war of Gog and Magog were already Holocaust, was already a piece of it. And maybe the First World War could have also been a piece of it. I mean, these things could have been going on because, again, you're dealing with, God was preparing for the flood for 120 years. Noah was building a table. So you can imagine that the great flood of divine revelation, which is much greater than that flood, also has a preparation period lasting for 120 years at least. So these powerful events that shook the earth and that affected the Jewish people, so it's quite possible that some of these wars that happened were part of Gog and Magog. And I think the Chafetz Chaim and others have already said that Gog and Magog will be sliced into pieces through the various different wars. So I don't have time now because I do have to finish this class. I'm time limited because I have somewhere I'm going to speak afterwards. So I'm time bound, or else I would have kept you here another 2 hours. But based on the depiction of Zechariah, where it discusses, I don't remember which chapter it is, I didn't look it up right before the class, but you can look at the Haftorah of the first day of Sukkot. You can Google it, Haftorah, the first day of Sukkot. You'll find the chapter in Zechariah. And we spoke about it 2 years ago, right after October 7th. It's almost impossible to argue that part of those prophecies did not happen on October 7th. It discusses an onslaught into Israel. There it doesn't say Israel, it says Jerusalem. It says they will come into the cities, they will plunder the cities, they will rape the women, they will murder, they will kill, and they will take half the city into captivity. And the other half will survive. That's exactly what happened across the Gaza envelope in Israel, all across the south of Israel. Every single thing of that. So definitely that was a manifestation of somewhat of Gog and Magog. But there is another piece that I think just happened this year on Hoshana Rabbah. One of the events of the war of Gog and Magog is that Gog himself, the king, will come to Jerusalem. And the verse says, if I have to tell you, the verse says he's not going to even come on his own. Hashem says to Ezekiel, Ben Adam Simpanecha, man, put your eyes, El Gog, to Gog, Eretz HaMagog, the land of Magog, the Nasi, the president, the prince, Rosh Meshech V'Tuval, V'Nobeov, say prophecy upon him. And say, so says God, our God, I am upon you, Gog, the king, Rosh Meshech V'Tuval. I will drag you I will stick my finger I'll put a hook into your palate, and I will bring you and your armies, and I'll bring you upon Jerusalem. So that depiction is one of massive armies of millions of combatants coming on Jerusalem with massive armies, causing carnage and who knows what, led by this King Gog. If I may argue and say, that would have been the situation had this war come down on us as 100 or as a 90 or as an 85 on the Richter scale. I believe, and I'm going to argue the argument right now, and I think I'm right, or else I wouldn't be saying it, but I think I'm right, is that God gave us a Gog and Magog of a 1 or maybe a 3. God was so kind to us that he gave us the sweetest Gog and Magog onslaught that we've ever had. What is that? When on Sukkot is Gog and Magog supposed to come? When? Sukkot is 7 days. When is Gog and Magog supposed to go? Let me share with you the Arizal. Pretty serious. Now, this all goes back to my grays growing up. I'll give the credit to the holy Shechinah Rebbe that I grew up by. Because the one thing that he mentioned, including the Shechinah going out of exile, but what he mentioned every single year is he would say, it says in the writings of the Ari that the war of Gog and Magog is going to happen on Hoshana Rabbah. And he would say it every single year. And I have to tell you that throughout the years, right before when Sukkot came every year, I'm always looking at the news. I'm wondering, is Gog and Magog coming? Whenever I heard Middle East tension and it was around Sukkot time, I said, maybe this is it. Maybe this is it. Perhaps we're there. Gog and Magog is going to come, because I had it in my bones from when I grew up. This year, Hoshana Rabbah by night, I took out the book of the Shechinah Rebbe called Minchas Yehuda, and I went through all of his Torahs, and he said it again and again. He says it says in Arizal, and I could not find where the Arizal is. He doesn't say a source. It drove me crazy because I wanted to read it in the Ari. Thank God for my new library that I bought. Remember, I told you that I bought a sefer, a digital library called Otzar HaChachma, and 2 hours ago I punched it in. Hoshana Rabbah, 3 hours ago, Gog and Magog. Bingo! I found it. All the sources. In Sefer Lekutim, in Yecheskel. Okay, here we go. V'haya on the pasuk, Siman Lamed Ches. This is Arizal on page, my copy of the Kisvei Ari, it's in page Taf Yud Zayin. In Sefer Yecheskel. Gog will come. Listen to what the Arizal says. He says, Da, you should know, ki Gog and Magog, that Gog and Magog, oile begamatria ayin. He says Gog and Magog, if you take the two words, numeric value 70. That is to tell you that this is not an individual war by one person coming to fight the Jewish people. It's the gathering of all the nations in the world, an onslaught against Israel. Keneged kol ayin umais. This is referring all the 70. Because then there will be one ruler who will dominate all 70. I'll call ayin umais on all 70. V'kulam yavayu yachad al Yisroel, and they'll all come together on Israel. Ukishen yigalu Yisroel miyadam, and when the Jewish people will be saved from them, az yiyah Hoshana Rabbah, then it's going to be the great salvation. It's going to be the great Hoshana. And that's why it's called the great Hoshana, because now, whenever we were saved from a nation, we got done with the Babylonians and the Persians lined up. We got run with the Persians, then the Greeks came. When we got with the Greeks, then the Romans came, and then these came, then the Spanish came and took their turn, and then the English came and took their turn, and then the Germans came and took their turn, and then the Russian Tsars came, and Khmelnytsky came and took them, and then the Arabs came, and the Antifadas came. Everybody came, took their turn to beat, to plunder, to rob, to enslave, to hurt, to abuse the Jewish people. And of course, everybody in the name of morality, and everybody always excused it as they're the saviors of the planet from this wicked entity called Israel, the Jewish people. But in any case, since in Hoshana Rabbah it's going to be the completion, the ultimate defeat of all of it, that's the reason why Gog and Magog. Okay. It's the great of the great salvation. And since the nations are compared to water, that's why they poured water libations every day. And because to help with this situation. Any case, this is what the Arizal says. Okay. Now, what am I saying? I believe that President Trump, who came to Israel, it was so strange. God orchestrated that he came to Israel exactly for 3 hours. He was in the Knesset, I think, 3 hours. I didn't look this up, but I think I heard a rabbi who said something like this, but it's possible. It makes sense because there is a statement that says, Hoshana Shalosh Sha'is, save the 3 hours. So there is a tradition going back to the Vilna Gaon. For those of you who like me to give a Litvish source, there is a Litvish tradition going through the Ma'aril Diskin. Okay, from Rabbi Ma'aril Diskin was a great Jerusalem rabbi from the Lithuanian, not from the Chassidim. Going back, which heard from it all the way up to the Vilna Gaon, from Chaim of Volozhin all the way to the Vilna Gaon, saying that Hoshana Rabbah will be the war of Gog and Magog. Again, the same idea like the Arizal we have from the Vilna Gaon, and he says that the whole thing will go down in 3 hours. And there's a statement, I was looking for it in the Siddur, I don't know where it comes from, but it's supposed to be somewhere in the Siddur, but I tried to do it quickly before the class and I didn't get a chance, so maybe someone will share it to me. But it says, Hoshana Shalosh Sha'is, save us for the 3 hours. In other words, there's supposed to be dark 3 hours that could have been a nuclear war. That God saved us, Gewalt. Instead, Trump was in the Knesset enjoying the accolades, enjoying all the clapping and everything. But why is it Gog and Magog? Then it doesn't seem like it's in any way anything bad. It was great. President Trump came to visit us, and his daughter Ivanka was there, and his son-in-law Jared was there. It was beautiful. And it really was beautiful. That's why I'm saying it was the sweetest Gog and Magog we could have ever gotten. But it was still Gog and Magog. You know why? Because President Donald Trump twisted and turned the arms of the Jewish people and forced them to make a peace treaty against the good, the ultimate good of what we needed to do in this war. We needed to obliterate Hamas, and we did not do so. They're still in power, and everybody sees they're violating the ceasefire. And no one believed for 1 second they would keep the ceasefire. They're a bunch of terrorists. They're liars. They have zero morality. They have nothing to them. They're killers. They're butchers. You cannot make deals with terrorists, and Trump knows that. Why is he doing it? Is it Qatari money? Is it the desire that he wants to go down as the ultimate peacemaker in the world who make peace? Is it out of genuine care that he cares for Israel? I think it's a lot of everything. I think he cares about the Jews. He loves the Jewish people. I believe he genuinely loves the Jewish people. I believe he genuinely had tremendous sympathy for the families of the hostages. Am I not happy the hostages have come out? Listen to the first half of the class. I'm thrilled the hostages came out. But to make such a deal, now maybe you'll argue it was the only way to get them out, and maybe the intentions are good. All I can say is I don't think anybody ever bullied Israel behind the scenes like Trump bullied Israel. Netanyahu almost didn't have any choice. Trump was going to kill him if he was not going to go along with this, and Netanyahu knew that. But that's only part of it. The other part is, where did Trump continue on from directly from Jerusalem? Where did he go? He went to El Sharif into Egypt. That's where all of our exiles begin, in Egypt, right? So the grand finale ends in Egypt. What starts in Egypt ends in Egypt. How do you like that? It's a new phrase. What starts in Egypt ends in Egypt. So on Hoshana Rabbah, Trump gathers. Now, I love Trump. You know that he's the biggest friend of the Jewish people. God bless him. Okay? But he got along. He made a little party over there with a whole bunch of Jew haters. Guterres, the leader of the UN, the big carer of world peace, together with Macron, together with the loser from England, together with the Spanish anti-Semite over there, and one after another, all of them gathered together, and they're going to decide the future of the Middle East. They weren't even going to have Netanyahu there. Last minute, Trump, because he really does love Jews, asked Netanyahu to come, but guess what? Edgeware, whatever his name is, the Turkish guy, again, this is the story they say, turned around his plane and said, I'm not coming if the Jew is there. So imagine, they're going to make peace. This is like everybody lovey-dovey. Everybody's going to go, we're all going to kiss each other. We all love the Jews. We love Israel. We love the Jews. Everything's great. But we're making a big party, but we don't want the Jews there. Don't you dare bring Netanyahu there. It's such a fraud. And it's basically the gathering of the 70 nations. Gathered together on Hoshana Rabbah. But the manifestation that Gog has to come to Israel, he came to Jerusalem on Hoshana Rabbah morning, and he was there for 3 hours. Hodu Lashem Kitov, thank God. We've had the war of Gog and Magog. I think, where is Trump failing? Again, I don't know. I hate making predictions about him because he's completely unpredictable. And sometimes I got very angry at him, and then suddenly he showed different colors. Like he's unpredictable because I don't believe it's him. Here's the thing. The main reason I think he was involved in this whole thing, I gave you Qatari money, I gave you his pride, I gave you all these are good reasons, but there's much deeper reason why he came. He came because he had no choice. The reason he's making this deal, and the reason why, who's pumping into his head that he's going to be the ultimate hero, and he's going to be the one who will bring about through this, will make the Abraham Accords, and he will, the Avraham Accords, like he loves calling it. It's like, he will do all of this. You can say he's motivated by all these things, but I'll tell you the real reason. He's not motivated by anything. God stuck his finger in him, and he's pulling him to do this. Like it says, God says, I will bring Gog on the land. But thank God it could have been Barack Obama, and it would have been not good. It could have been Kamala Harris, and that would have been, it could have been, Rahman al-Islan, some other ruthless tyrant. I'm not calling them ruthless tyrants, but they're not the biggest friends of the Jewish people. It could have been some real anti-Semite who would have done this, and who knows what would be. So it came about through the most friendliest president we've ever had. But here's what's going on. We're seeing right now that Hamas is breaking their rules, their agreements. They did not return the bodies of the hostages they were supposed to return. And then we know why, because they're trying to hold on. If they can't hold on to live Jews, they're holding on to a dead. They need a piece of a Jew to keep them in business. They need something. Even dead bodies they're holding on to. Showing like how desperate the forces of the satanic forces is so desperate that it's holding on to a dead Jew if it can't hold on to a live one. But they're making shtickis. Shtickis means they're making games. But not only that, they killed two soldiers the other day. Went over the yellow line. They tried to kidnap more soldiers. They tried to take, just on the attack that happened. What does Trump do? Instead of telling Israel, okay, get right back to it, he says, I'm going to give Hamas a little bit more of a chance to behave. What do you mean to behave? Are you out of your mind to behave? Yeah, let's give them a chance to behave. He, for dear life, does not want to lose this great peace in the Middle East. There is not going to be no peace in the Middle East because, their idea of peace now is to create an international oversight together with a Palestinian force. It ain't going to happen. The Palestinians will not live in Israel side to side with the Jews. The reason is they're not meant to be there. It's the Jewish homeland. And that's God's promise. That's not Rabbi Wolf's statement. It's not me. It's not, go fight God. God decreed so that this is his land that he's giving for Israel for all of eternity. And no one has a right on to make any other decisions. Not the UN and not any other, and not President Trump. So they can do whatever they want and make all their plans. It's all, like you said today when you asked me which verse it is, it says the nations will make a commotion, they'll make a whole thing, but Yosef b'Shamayim Yitzchak, God will laugh at them. So a little more proof that this is Gog and Magog. So I'll share with you something really cool. As I was finding in my new book, in my new digital book that gives me if I would have had a chance to go through everything that's there, I probably could have given an 8-hour class on this because there were so many books that he's bringing from this idea, but I found something really cool. In one of my favorite books from Pinchas of Koretz. Pinchas of Koretz is one of the senior students of the Holy Baal Shem Tov. So it says God will test the nations on the holiday of Sukkot. It says when the nations will argue and say, how come you didn't give us a mitzvah? God will say, I'll give you a mitzvah. And God will give them one mitzvah, the mitzvah of Sukkot. And they will make it on their roofs, it says. They will make their sukkah, rooftop sukkah. God will make it so hot that it will be intolerable. You will not be able to stay in the sukkah. And they will leave their sukkah, but they'll be so angry, they'll kick the walls of the sukkah. That's what the sages tell us. And God says, you see, I gave you an easy mitzvah, you couldn't keep it. So what are you saying? Had we had the mitzvahs, we would have kept it. That's what the sages say. So he asks, why the sukkah? So he says, I heard in the name of Reb Shmerel. When you write in a sefer and you get a Torah from Reb Shmerel, it's already good. How many Torahs do you hear from Reb Shmerel? Varche Viker, who was a big tzaddik. Sorry, Reb Shmerel, I'm not chepening, but I like it. I love Shmerel. Any case, who said B'Shem HaBaal Shem Tov, in the name of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov explained this teaching. The Baal Shem Tov said the main idea of sukkah is humility. Hear this. The main idea of sukkah is humility. For a person to be nothing. And he explains it Kabbalistically how in the sukkah, because in the sukkah you leave your comforts of your house, you're living in a rundown shack. It creates a certain humility. It creates a certain humbleness in front of God. And where there is humility, that's where God can dwell. So God dwells in the sukkah because we are humble, and then God comes to dwell there. That's why Hashem gives them the mitzvah of sukkah, to see if they can be humble. They will go and make it on their rooftops, which is already showing, meaning they're going to go and make an arrogant sukkah. And therefore, God will burn it with the sun. We'll take out the sun. They're not interested. That's what the Baal Shem Tov teaches. Comes the Reb Pinchas of Karitzer and explained, and he says like this. Listen to these words. The Yesh Kabbalah, there is a Kabbalah, the Melchemes Gog and Magog Yeh b'Sukkos, that the war of Gog and Magog will be on Sukkos. Why? So what's the connection of Gog and Magog to Sukkos? Because the world says, the world says, when you see a big guy, when you see someone who's like 7.5 foot big, boorish, tall, big, a giant type of a guy. When you see a guy like that, people say, this guy, he's like Gog and Magog. There used to be a phrase that people would say, you see a big guy, it's like Gog and Magog. But he says the intention is not that this is going to be a big, physically a giant. Because where do we find, he says, that anywhere in the Midrashic thing that he will be a giant? No, he says. When he says he will be big, means he will be a person that will have enormous pride in himself. Ragasis aruach, he's going to be very full of self-aggrandizement and self-pride. Like it's, Elechein. And therefore, since Sukkos is all about humility, so he's going to, now, one thing I will say about Trump, I love him and I give him a lot of, applause for all he's done and all the great things. I don't think that one of the characteristics that we will say on him after his passing, after his live a long life, but is that he was the most humble person in the world. Humility is not necessarily too high in his book. He's full of himself and pumping his own. He's the guy who deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. He deserves everything. He is the savior of the world. He is the guy. Anyways, he's got that, and it serves him well, because it's precisely because of that he feels that he's going to fix every problem, and he goes out there and he actually works nonstop with diligence, because he has the most confidence you've ever seen any about person in the world, and he has everybody literally. You ever see the way he shakes hands with Macron? He grabs him like a and the other guy's trying to show power, but not with him. He's dominant. He is the boss. Everybody knows Donald Trump is the boss. He has that. So when I saw that, I said, and that's why it comes on Sukkos, because Sukkos is the Jewish people pride, do humility, and he's the antithesis to that. So the war is, so that really fit. Also, when he walked into the Knesset, it was all about Donald Trump. It was everybody kissing him. Everybody, they were talking and pouring and showering him with praise like you've never seen. The other interesting thing is that in Sefer Arvei Nachal, which is another great Hasidic Rebbe, Arvei Nachal, the book is Arvei Nachal. It's related to Sukkot. It's not a book on Sukkot, but I forgot the name of the author. It's a famous Hasidic book. So over there he brings that Gog is the same letters. Take a look. It's the same letters as David. Because David is Dalid, Vav, Dalid. And Gog is Gimel, Vav, Gimel. Meaning it's the same setup like David. It's just that in David, it's Dalid, Vav, Dalid, which Dal, the word Dal means the poor one. The one who doesn't have. Gimel is, but in Gog, instead of a Dalid Vav Dalid, it's a Gimel Vav. What did the sages say is the difference between a Gimel and Dalid? Gimel is the philanthropist. Gimel is the giver. Dalid is the receiver. When you watched the small little Jewish people, the Knesset, being humble in front of Trump because they get their weapons and they get their money and they get their thing. Being the humble, small little David, being the David, being the Yoyim. And Trump walking in there as, I sent my B-52 bombers, I sent my thing, and only American can do it, and only American. Now he's doing good things. He's the Gomel. He's the ultimate giver. He got the hostages out. He's the one That's a good Gog. It's a good Gog. As I said, it was a good Gog. I'm not saying it was a bad Gog. But thank God, Yishtabach Shemo, as we say, that we've had the most beautiful Gog and Magog grand finale take place this Hoshana Rabbah. So we're done with that. Now we're ready for the next chapter. And that is that Trump should come around. You should realize that these Hamas guys, Hamasniks, are good for nothing bums. You should give the green light for complete obliteration of them. Israel should have the guts to declare Yehuda, Shamron, and Gaza all Jewish land, and nothing is being, and everything is going to be made into the future land of the Holy Land of Israel. So this is some of what I wanted to share with you tonight, and I think this kind of summarizes the new world that we're coming. And what's so special is, the fact that all this is all happening in Pei Vav, which, as I said earlier, is this year of resurrection. And it's like we are literally now moving along into the grand finale. So this is really exciting. And may Hashem, may we see the full redemption. The Shechinah is out already. In our own life, it means that we should have our own Shechinah come out. I mean, our own godliness and our own soul should already be able to shine in all of its brightness. Until we meet the next time, everybody be well, and let us have Moshiach now.